8. Anything done for the first time unleashes a demon. Why, everyone wanted to know, were there blood stains on that photograph of John Pilger? The room was a silent place, grown dusty through 5 undisturbed years, its cold air thick with memories. It was a place of heavy darkness and melancholy. Winterdawn could remember a time when it had not been dark. The light was long dimmed, but Winterdawn could still see patches of it. Intense flecks, starfire bright, radiating warmth. Everything had been kept as he remembered. The photographs, the furniture, the ornaments, the bed she slept in, the books she read, the odds and ends on her bedside table, all served as reminders, so much a part of her. Daring to touch something, Winterdawn reached for the book on the bedside table. Pilger's Distant Voices, its cover discoloured by brown stains, blood snowflakes flattened across the author's features. Winterdawn skimmed through it without concentrating. Letters, words, sentences, paragraphs, all blurs of black on white, their meaning wrested from them. Winterdawn wasn't reading. His mind was wandering through past years of bitter memories, through the earliest months of his loss. The rain drummed a constant beat against the window. The book remained wedged in his cold, numbing fingers. Nothing broke his train of thought. Winterdawn remembered. The chair was unfamiliar then, an awkward shape trapping him wherever he went. He writhed in constant frustration, straining to break free of this bulky prison. He was strapped into a chair like a condemned man. The air around him was alive with the buzz of expectant voices, young voices, student voices, offset by the more mature droning of underworked lecturers. Sitting in a draughty church hall, waiting for a meeting to begin, waiting to watch a debate more heated in their imagination than it would be in life. The discussion was a formality. It couldn't reverse the UN's decision. There was a crowd of protesters in the hall, a far cry from Grosvenor, Winterdawn felt. He wasn't sure what they were protesting about. Some seemed opposed to UN adventurism in the Persian Gulf. Others were protesting, and Winterdawn found this particularly embarrassing, about discrimination against the limbically disenfranchised. Winterdawn listened, wearing an expression of grim neutrality. Inside he was cackling. There were about 40 or 50 observers in the hall, hardly a capacity crowd, but 49 more than Winterdawn expected. Winterdawn was there as a representative of the miracle workers. Kitely was there too, sporting a Mona Lisa smile and a pair of distorting spectacles. The UN had sent a representative too, a pale man on the edge of his 50s, who cracked his knuckles and chewed nicotine replacement gum, an ex-soldier who wanted to be somewhere else. There was a murmur of discontent from the anti-imperialists as the chairman announced the UN's terms for the return of Fasciles' research. There was a blanket of silence when Kitely replied that everything would be returned, all the original material, all the subsequent research, and all projects suspended. Kitely spoke in a dangerous voice that sounded as though she was enjoying the situation. Winterdawn wheeled himself forward and watched the expectant faces, the more alert demonstrating the facial symptoms of perceived betrayal. I despise you. I despise this sick world humanity has built. I am going to smash it. Everything you have ever believed in, everything you hold dear, he declaimed, but only in his imagination. His genuine speech was more mundane. I am resigning to spend more time with my daughter. He thought he had got away with it. 5 years of covert research. He was so close to the breakthrough. He thought he'd won. Then this doctor had come to the house. A coincidence, perhaps? Winterdawn doubted it, but he was none the less pleased by the stranger's arrival. He could contain his excitement no longer. At last, there was someone who would understand, someone in whom he could confide, even though it meant the end of his work. Winterdawn snapped the book shut and restored it to its place on the bedside table. When he looked up, the doctor was standing in the doorway. Winterdawn studied the newcomer with an analytic eye, absorbing every detail into an educated first impression. The doctor was not a tall man. He was slightly built, though Winterdawn felt that this belied a powerful physical strength. He was dressed in a cream-white suit that struck Winterdawn as incongruous but not exceptional. His appearance was unremarkable, saving his face. The doctor's features were vague, almost fluid. One second he seemed to be an old man, his face worn by centuries of careful studying. The next he had the smooth face of a child, radiating angelic innocence. His hair was a thicket of dark curls, receding to reveal a high intellectual forehead. Then there were his eyes, whirls of black light like holes in space, doors into the infinite. Eyes that watched patiently. "Doctor!" Winterdawn smiled generously, hoping to start off on the right foot. The doctor said nothing. The silence was painful, but Winterdawn continued. "I'm Professor Jeremy Winterdawn. I welcome you as a fellow scientist." The doctor strolled through the gloom, speaking in a low, powerful voice as he moved his head held at a slight angle. "There is something sick happening in this house. There's an evil atmosphere here, thick and dense. It's like a web that's ensnared me, drawing me to this house. Since then, one of my friends has almost been eaten alive by those obscenities in the conservatory, having first been threatened at knife point by your pet lunatic." The doctor's voice rose in pitch, volume, anger. "I've been held at gunpoint. I've no idea where my other friend is, nor why I'm here at all. But I know the sort of power that's responsible. As I said, there's something sick happening here, and you are at its heart." Winterdawn drummed his fingers on the side of the wheelchair, hesitating before breaking the silence. "This was my wife's room," he said firmly, reasonably. "You will not shout in here." The doctor looked up slowly, then nodded. "I'm sorry," he said, quieter than before, "but I demand an explanation." "You're hardly in a position to demand anything," Winterdawn managed to muster a threatening tone. "You've broken into my house. The best you can expect from me is a good word to the police. That's assuming you haven't taken or damaged anything." "You won't call the police. You'd have to explain what you're doing. Something illegal, isn't it?" Winterdawn remained calm and decided to bluff. "Is it? Benny was almost killed. By her own negligence, if more is to be believed. By his prize-winning plants, who were doing no harm until she blundered into the middle. Is it illegal to keep carnivorous plants? Is it immoral, even?" The doctor considered, then shook his head. He wasn't giving up, though. "What about Cranley? What did you do to him?" "I took him in. He's my daughter's fiancé. He hasn't got a family prepared to look after him. What do you expect me to do? Let him live on the streets? Besides, he'd been here for years before he became unstable." "You let him play with a knife." The doctor's tone was accusatory. "Not with my knowledge. Irresponsible, but hardly a crime. Unlike what you've done," Winterdawn growled, tiring of this exchange. It was apparent that the doctor had no idea what he was doing. "Is there anything else you would like to accuse me of?" The doctor blinked slowly, then glanced around the room. He was still angry, but stripped of his accusations there was very little he could do. It was genuine anger, though. He had actually believed, probably still believed, that Winterdawn was up to no good. And he was a scientist. "I'll tell you what I've been doing," Winterdawn offered. "Please," the doctor replied guardedly, "as a fellow scientist." Winterdawn smiled slightly, and was pleased to receive a smile in response. The doctor's anger was harnessed by his curiosity. "Have you ever heard of Professor Carl Faskeles?" "The name rings a bell." "He's dead. He drove his car into a wall in the mid-70s. His body was burned beyond recognition. Nasty." Winterdawn squeezed the arms of his wheelchair, his knuckles whitening. It was a habit. Until then, he'd been working at Cambridge on his own theories into interstitial time. By which he meant an envelope of non-space, non-time, the Doctor interrupted, underlying the real universe. It surrounds and separates every space-time event, a theoretical zone of nullity. The gap between now and now, literally outside reality. He smiled smugly. Oh, Winterdawn was more irritated than anything else. You know. I'm a fellow scientist, the Doctor replied, wearing his innocent child's face. Until about 5 years ago, I worked with a team at Cambridge who sought ways of applying theoretical quantum physics. We wanted to manipulate space-time. We were miracle workers. We wanted to walk on water. And did you? No, we ended up impersonating St. Peter. Our theoretical knowledge was probably the most advanced in the West, but still limited. It'll be centuries before the technology exists for any practical use. Our task looked impossible. But on the quantum level, the Doctor wore a wry smile, nothing is impossible. Winterdawn nodded happily. We made a couple of discoveries. Fascales's main body of research had been brought up entirely by the UN, but it was made available to our college. There were probably funny handshakes involved. It turned out to be, we thought, gibberish. Then we read closer and discovered that there was something to it after all. Complex themes running through it, which were just enough to make it look credible. Fascales had come up with some amazing stuff that had been totally overlooked. The UN withdrew all the rights to the research. They were entitled to, of course, but it was disappointing for us. We'd come so far, and we were being stifled by official cowardice. So, we decided to continue in our work secretly. I'd had my accident. Winterdawn tapped the arms of his chair. So I resigned my seat at the college and disappeared into the sunset with illicit copies of our work. I'm still paid out of the college funds. All my results are sent to Cambridge through mailing companies set up when I resigned. Clandestine and, I confess, utterly illegal. He held wrists up to the Doctor. It's a fair cop. I'll come quietly. The Doctor turned away, frowning, then glanced back sharply. There's more to it than that. What have you done? Winterdawn paused, eagerly anticipating the collapse of the Doctor's composure. It took me 5 years. I have found a way to physically enter the interstitial gap. The Doctor batted an eyelid. Winterdawn savoured the silence. That's impossible, the Doctor said, with superficial confidence. But on the quantum level, nothing is impossible, Winterdawn replied smugly. Cranley's been there. Don't tell him what it did to his mind. Truman made recordings. Don't tell him what happened to those, either. You said yourself, the Doctor was rationalizing, it'll be centuries before the technology exists for any practical application. Fascales can only have given your work more theoretical depth. You couldn't have developed the technology unless... You said something about a couple of discoveries. Technology bequeathed to you from somewhere. He spoke under his breath, no longer addressing Winterdawn. Human technology, not in this period. Something extraterrestrial then. Nonsensical though it was, Winterdawn was intrigued by this speculation, but decided to chime in with a suitable prompt. Something Wedderburn found on his expeditions. Expeditions, yes, the Amazon, the Doctor mused, without dropping his obsessive line of inquiry. And what else did Wedderburn find in the Amazon? Local wildlife exposed to a powerful mutagenic over a long period of time. He turned back to Winterdawn, a look of triumph in his eyes. Wedderburn found something in the Amazon, an alien artifact emitting high levels of radioactivity. He brought it home, and you were able to apply it in your work. Am I warm? Warm-ish, Winterdawn conceded, surprised at the accuracy of the Doctor's deduction. I'm not sure about an alien artifact. I'm not that credulous. I have no idea where the thing comes from nor why it does what it does. But I don't care. It's an instrument for the manipulation of reality, Doctor. It can warp space-time round my little finger. Or it would, he added silently, if I understood all its functions. Do I sound obsessive? It's the mark of a committed scientist, the doctor replied. You've been using it to mess about with your architecture. You've noticed that. That's accidental. I'm not sure why it happens. Do you believe a word of what I've said? Every syllable. Unless you're a better liar than I credit you for. Well, Winterdawn thought, there's no answering that. For a moment, he wanted to climb out of the chair. He wanted to stare the doctor in the eye without getting a sore neck. He wanted to move properly, just once. It's true. I've seen it. Sandra was standing in the doorway, the woman who called herself Ace beside her. Both wore smiles that were not so much smug as triumphant. Winterdawn started, suspicious of the sudden rapport between his daughter and her attacker. He had no idea how to deal with this sudden alliance. Fortunately, the doctor took the lead. Ace, have you been all right? Shoved about a bit, nothing damaged. Did you find Benny? She's fine. A few pints short of a cardiovascular system, perhaps. Winterdawn's eye lighted on Ace's hands, on the object cupped in her palms. It was no larger than a tennis ball, transparent, glowing with a soothing blue light. And powerful. Fear tightened something in his chest. He barely heard of the conversation, his mind locked elsewhere. Yeah? Ace might as well be speaking from the other side of the solar system. Doctor, there's some weird shit happening in this house. You know? I know. The doctor plucked the object from her hands. He scrutinized it with the bearing of a professional. Pyramid power. Tetrahedron power, Doctor. Winterdawn became anxious to regain a hold on the conversation. You hold in your hand the final wonder of the world, God's own decoder keyring. The doctor was talking not to Winterdawn, but to Ace. Winterdawn felt rejected. Where was it? In that big wardrobe we saw when we first turned up, the one with the built-in floodlights. Sandra showed me. Winterdawn took this news in his stride, betrayed by his own daughter. So what? Did he care? Did he? This woman attacked my daughter, he said. The doctor turned sharply, a dark expression on his face. Ace? The doctor asked. No, she replied. No, Sandra reiterated. Winterdawn recognized the sincerity in both their voices. They weren't lying. In fact, there didn't seem to be any tension between them at all. Sandra had shown Ace the tetrahedron voluntarily, and that was proof. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. I'm sorry. It's okay, I forgive you, Ace winked. Winterdawn bit his lip, digging his tooth deep. There was a vague taste of blood. You must be Sandra, the doctor was saying, apparently seeing the matter as cleared away and forgotten. He placed a friendly hand on Sandra's shoulder. I've heard so much about you. I had to borrow your room. There's blood on the covers and a bullet in the ceiling, but it was all for the sake of a dear friend. Doctor? Sandra grinned nervously, shooting an awkward glance at Ace. That's him, Ace muttered. Yes. Sandra's manner became dark as she prized the intruding hand from her shoulder. I've heard a lot about you, too. Doctor, Winterdawn interrupted loudly, determined to regain the initiative. You know what's happening, you know what I'm doing, and you know how. Does my work interest you? The doctor fixed him with a sincere stare. Very much so. I'm going into the interstitial gap tonight, Winterdawn continued, ignoring the concerned expression flashing across his daughter's face. I was going to take Truman, but I'd prefer it if he stayed behind with the tetrahedron. And I don't want to go alone. Yes, the doctor replied guardedly, clearly aware of what was coming. You're a scientist, Doctor. You seem intelligent, imaginative, and open to new experiences. Would you like to see the cosmos from the outside? Will you stop struggling? Truman hissed. He had the third intruder of the night in an arm lock and was debating whether to twist it into a more painful position. He had found her in Sandra's room, conspiring with Cranley, of all people. This one called herself Bernice, which was an improvement on Ace, at least. Unlike the sour and sullen Ace, she was attractive, articulate, and awkward, trying to fidget her way out of his grip. Truman had hit on the idea that there was a paranoid conspiracy going on. Was it coincidence that 4 intruders were loose in the house on the same night? The doctor and the woman with the gun were still running around free somewhere. There was that weirdo Winterdawn had claimed he'd seen watching the house. Something sinister was going on, and Truman would lay odds that Winterdawn's experiments were at the heart of it. Bernice tried to jerk her arms out of his hold, but he twisted viciously until she screamed. "Shut up!" Truman recognized the quiet desperation in his voice. "For God's sake, shut up!" "Have you ever thought," Bernice said, through tightly clenched teeth, "of going into public relations? You'd go down a bomb." Truman pressed his free hand under her jaw, forcing it closed. His fingers brushed slowly against her face and hair, but he withdrew the hand hurriedly after the woman sunk her teeth into his index finger. "Don't ever, ever touch me there." Truman twisted her arms viciously. After considerable effort, he'd have to go back and check the furniture for fingernail scratches, Truman finally got the uncooperative bitch into the presence of Professor Jeremy Winterdawn. He was coming down the stairs, wheeled down the ramp by his daughter. She was all right, thank God. "Professor Winterdawn, may I present," he announced with considerable difficulty, "yet another of the doctor's friends." "Let her go." Truman started, swinging his gaze upwards to see the doctor hovering on the stairs behind Sandra, Ace at his side. She was wearing a vicious expression that did little for his life expectancy. The doctor had placed a restraining hand on her shoulder, and Truman was at least grateful to the little bastard for this. For the moment, his reaction was simple surprise. His triumphant smile cracked and fell open. Bernice pulled herself free, but Truman didn't resist. "Harry, there seems to have been a small misunderstanding. This is the doctor and Ace, and you appear to have hurt one of their friends." The voice was coming from another galaxy. Truman caught the gist. His eyes flicked between the doctor and Winterdawn, and for once he was grateful for the mask. "The doctor," Winterdawn explained, not unkindly, "is going into the gap with me tonight. Whenever you're ready, Harry." "Yes, of course," Truman mumbled, as Professor, daughter, and wheelchair moved past him down the ramp. The doctor followed them, speaking softly, reciting a rhyme which Truman hadn't heard since childhood. "As I was going up the stair, I met a man who wasn't there. He wasn't there again today. I wish he'd stay away." "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped, though sudden fear, rather than hate, of the doctor was dominant among his emotions. "Don't you know?" the doctor asked. Truman's aggressive stance dissolved into outright terror. The doctor's eyes had been steel grey and terrible, and his voice was harsh with truth. Ace allowed Benny to slip alongside her at the back of the procession. "Hello," her companion announced with a cheerfulness Ace felt was misplaced. "Here we are, 3 jolly souls all together again." "2 jolly souls and 1 bloody idiot," Ace announced, jerking her head towards the doctor's back. A weary frown crossed Benny's face. "What's he done this time?" Ace told her. "That's the stupidest thing I've heard this century," Benny proclaimed. "That's why I'm doing it," the doctor mumbled. "You're mad." Ace lowered her voice to a quiet hiss. "Winterdawn's a Fruit Loop. I wouldn't want to be alone in the same room as him, and you're taking him on a round trip out of reality." "Trust me," the doctor whispered. "I know what I'm doing." Ace doubted it. There was a hush in the cellar room, of the kind Benny usually associated with religious ceremonies. Something sacred was about to take place, and from what Ace had told her, it sounded like human sacrifice. The wardrobe was a wardrobe among wardrobes, but nothing more than that. It didn't strike her as a potential entrance to other worlds. But then neither would a police box. The doors had been thrown wide open, revealing bugger all. 3 walls, a ceiling, a floor, solid. It was seriously unimpressive. Benny was cursed with a sceptical streak and by the feeling that the doctor wouldn't be going anywhere. Truman sat cross-legged on the floor, a bland, masked monk in meditation. The tetrahedron sat before him, glowing deeper in response to whatever it was he was doing. Benny had seen more convincing light bulbs and still wasn't prepared to let the interstitial gap have the benefit of the doubt. Winterdawn was talking to his daughter. They were too distant to make out anything that was said, but Benny could sense a certain guardedness in their conversation. Winterdawn making backup plans, probably. In case of emergency, pull here. The doctor inspected the cabinet briefly before cutting across the room to join his companions. "Ace, Benny," he said, "are you sure you won't come? It'll be a fascinating experience." "I need to watch your back." "My back is fine. It doesn't need watching." "Benny?" "No, thanks." Benny smiled lightly. "I don't believe in it." "Well, if I can't tempt you, as the bishop said to the actress," Benny grinned salaciously. "I will see you back here in a couple of hours," the doctor said, and it seemed to be an effort for him. "That's a promise. Keep an eye on Truman." And he turned away from them, moving towards Winterdawn. "Good luck." Ace sounded uncomfortable, stopping the doctor in mid-stride. "Professor," she added, breaking into a pleasant smile. The doctor half turned back to them and flicked at his forelock. "Thank you, Dottie." He trundled across to join Winterdawn. "What's he mean about Truman?" Ace whispered. "Have you seen his face?" Ace shook her head. "You haven't missed much." Benny let her concentration wander around the room. It lighted on the features of Professor Winterdawn, now talking eagerly to the doctor. The old man's face was alive with a cheery enthusiasm which struck a chord somewhere in Benny's consciousness. There was something beautiful about his behaviour, a good-natured obsession which Benny recognized as part of herself. And there was something dark and sick and rotting and buried clawing at the back of Benny's mind, scratching away the warmth and the coziness. Benny felt nauseous. She almost doubled up, but controlled herself by biting her lip, chewing with vigorous concentration. "Ace," she said quietly, but with a heavy emphasis. "Yeah," Ace replied, but she was watching the doctor, and Benny felt insecure voicing her thoughts without proper eye contact. Sandra slipped across the room to join them, sparing Benny her embarrassment. "They're going," was all she said. Benny tried to let her fear slip away while she watched. It didn't work. There was cold pain in her chest. The doctor pushed Winterdawn and his chair into the sarcophagus, pulling the door closed behind him. Anticlimax. A handful of uneventful seconds slipped by. Light exploded from the sarcophagus, searing light seeping from cracks and gaps in the wardrobe's shape. Hiroshima light was followed by a long, deathly Hiroshima silence. Benny's composure was cracking. She was certain that they would open the wardrobe and find a couple of incinerated bodies, one tangled up in a molten metal frame. The other she didn't want to think about. "It's okay," Truman said softly. "They've gone." There was another long silence bereft of the tension which characterized the first. It was broken by the distant doorbell being rung in short but rapid bursts. An impatient caller, apparently. Sandra smiled easily at the other women and slipped out of the room. "Okay," Ace said. "What's wrong?" Benny stared at her, unwilling to divulge her thoughts. "I'm not stupid. I can tell when something's up," Ace persisted. Benny nodded and drew her companion into a corner as distant from Truman as possible. A mixture of relief and trepidation built up inside her as she began to air her feels. "Do you feel that there's more going on here than Winterdawn is saying?" "More?" Ace replied coolly. "I'm certain." "You are?" "You'd be certain if you'd almost had your head torn off by Winterdawn's 20-foot pet locust. And there's an attic window which changes colour." Benny blinked with practised calmness. "What if I told you there's a woman loose trying to shoot people? Winterdawn a speciality. She's got a sensible attitude towards him." "I'm trying to be serious," Benny snapped, her composure caving in again. She'd promised herself that she wasn't going to cry. Have you ever had a nightmare which is so bloody awful you're grateful to wake up? And after it, you start to get the feeling that it wasn't a dream, it really happened, and you're just trying to forget it. I had a dream after I'd been attacked in the conservatory. I dreamt I was in the cellar, and there was something terrible there with me. I found something sick, a slice of genuine evil, and I think I did. Briefly, she felt awful. She'd been spouting rubbish, and Ace was going to laugh in her face and make her feel like shit. She wasn't certain what she believed herself. She should have kept quiet. Ace said nothing. Benny took this as a bad sign and let her depression mature. "Do you want to take a look in the cellar?" Ace asked, breaking Benny's fears. "If you were just dreaming, it can't do any harm. If it's real, we'd better see what it is, right?" "Right. Thanks," Benny replied elatedly. "It's okay. Afterwards we can go hunt my big insect, right?" Benny was grinning as she nodded. But still she was afraid of the cellar. It couldn't have been a dream. Dreams don't inspire so much fear. Sandra reached the front door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. Her apology had begun before it was fully open. "I'm sorry you had to wait so long, but this is a big house and I was busy in the cellar." The apology was abruptly curtailed when she saw the figures on the far side. There were two people standing on the porch. Sandra knew neither. They were tall, sharp-featured, blue-eyed, and blonde. Both wore the same patient expression. Sandra was startled by how attractive she found both. Their clothes were formal, the man in a suit, the woman in a dress offset by her hair which hung around her shoulders. Hair and clothes that seemed perfectly dry, though they must have walked through the rain up a muddy track to have reached the house. "Good evening," the man announced, in tones just slightly too rich for Sandra's liking. "My name is Gabriel." "And I am Tanith," the woman continued. "We are not expected." Their faces cracked open into self-satisfied crescent moon smiles.